The Hayatus Sahaba focuses on anecdotes from the lives of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. And in the initial chapters, there's a subchapter which focuses on the description of the Sahaba as given in the verses of the Noble Quran and the ahadith of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And at the end of the Hayatus Sahaba, which is a book that has 3 volumes, there's a chapter on how to draw the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in this chapter, there is a description of the Sahaba radiallahu anhum again. But this time, it's not from the verses of the Noble Quran, nor from the ahadith, but more so from the enemies who had interacted with the Sahaba, who had observed them, who noticed their conduct, who watched them from near and far. So there is the anecdote with regards to the description that comes in a narration where the Persian emperor had sought help from the Chinese emperor. And this occurred in the Khilafah of Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhum, which was from around the 22nd year after Hijrah up until the 35th year after Hijrah. He was the 3rd Khalif of Islam, and during his reign as Khalif, Islam spread far and wide. And amongst his achievements was that the Persian Empire was conquered, and that entire region came into the deen of Islam. So when the army of Sayyidina Uthman radiallahu anhum had advanced towards the Persian Empire, Ibn Jarir, in his history book, in his Tarikh book, he has written, أن يزدجر كتب إلى ملك الصين يستمده. So Yazdajir, who was the last Persian emperor, controlled that entire region where they were all fire worshippers, he wrote to the Chinese emperor, was further towards the east, يستمده, seeking help from him, telling him that, look, I am facing a formidable enemy now. And this was obviously the Muslims. And I need your assistance and support in combating this enemy. فَقَالَ لِلرَّسُولِ. So Yazdajir sent his message with an envoy to the Chinese emperor. And the envoy of Yazdajir reached the Chinese emperor, and he presented the letter which the Chinese emperor read. And after reading that, he responded to those who formed part of the envoy, those who had brought the letter of Yazdajir to the Chinese emperor. فَقَالَ لِلرَّسُولِ. He said to the messenger, قَدْ أَرَفْتُ أَنَّ حَقًّا عَلَى الْمُلُوكِ إِنْجَادُ الْمُلُوكِ عَلَى مَنْ غَلَبَهُم. That I know well that when there is a king that is asking another king for help, that is only right that the one whose help is being sought from should assist the one who needs the help. Meaning that me, as the Chinese emperor, I'm being called upon to help the Persian emperor. And it's only right that I should go and help him and assist him. But before making that decision as to whether I will help him or not, I have a few questions for you. So the Chinese emperor says, فَصِفْ لِي صِفَةَ هَؤُلَاءِ الْقَوْمِ الَّذِينَ أَخْرَجُوكُم مِّن بِلَادِكُمْ. Before going further, would you describe to me these people who have come to you that are now kicking you out of your land? فَإِنِّي أَرَاكَ تَذْكُرُ كِلَّةٍ مِّنْهُمْ وَكَثْرَةً مِّنْكُمْ. Because what I've heard is that they are few in number, and you are large in number. ولا يبلغ أمثال هؤلاء القليل الذين تصف منكم فيما أسمع من كثرتكم إلا بخير عندكم وشر فيكم. And when you have a small amount of people that is overpowering a large number of people, then this only occurs when there's some goodness in those small amount of people. And there is rot and evil in the larger concentration of people. So the Chinese emperor says, in fact, the messenger of Yazdajir then says to the Chinese emperor, Salni amma ahbabta. Ask me whatever questions you want about these people, referring to the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. So the Chinese emperor asked, Ayufuna bil ahd? Do they fulfill their covenants? When they engage in a treaty, when they give their word, do they fulfill that? So the messenger says, Naam. Yes, they do fulfill their covenants. The Chinese emperor then asked, وَمَا يَقُولُونَ لَكُمْ قَبْلَ أَن يُقَاتِلُوكُمْ? Tell me, what do they say to you before they fight you? قُلْتُ. The messenger says, يَدْعُونَنَا إِلَى وَاحِدَةٍ مِّن ثَلَاثٍ. They call us to one of three options. إِمَّا دِينِهِمْ فَإِنْ أَجَبْنَاهُمْ أَجْرَوْنَا مَجْرَاهُمْ. They first call us towards their deen, the deen of Islam. And if we accept that, then they grant us protection like how they protect one of their brothers. أَوِ الْجِزْيَةِ وَالْمَنْعَةِ. The second option is that we pay to them jizya, and as a result of that, they protect us. And the third option is أَوِ الْمُنَابَذَةِ. That if we do not accept any of the first two options, then the third option is that they call us towards physical combat, towards the battlefield. So these are the three options that they call us towards when they encounter any enemy. Then the Chinese emperor then asks and says, فَكَيْفَ طَاعَتُهُمْ أُمَرَاءَهُمْ. Tell me, how do they respond to their leaders? قُلْتُ أَطْوَعُ قَوْمٍ لِمُرْشِدِهِمْ. They are most obedient to their leaders. That is what the messenger responded in describing the Sahaba, that they are most obedient to their leaders. The next question of the Chinese emperor is, فَمَا يُحِلُّونَ وَمَا يُحَرِّمُونَ. What do they consider as permissible and what do they consider as impermissible? And the messenger says, فَأَخْبَرْتُهُ. He then described, what is halal and which is haram. So he doesn't give the details of what response he had given to the Chinese emperor. Then the Chinese emperor asks, أَيُحَرِّمُونَ مَا حُلِّلَ لَهُمْ أَوْ يُحِلُّونَ مَا حُرِّمَ عَلَيْهِمْ. Do they consider halal that which has been made haram? Or do they consider haram that which has been made halal? So the messenger says, La. No, what is halal, it's clear, and they consider that as halal, and what is haram, they consider that as haram. They do not interfere with the rulings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Chinese emperor then says, فَإِنَّ هَؤُلَاءِ الْقَوْمِ لَا يَهْلِكُونَ أَبَدًا حَتَّى يُحِلُّوا حَرَامَهُمْ وَيُحَرِّمُوا حَلَالَهُمْ. That this people will never be destroyed, ever, until they consider what is halal to be haram and what they consider what is haram to be halal. Both ways. So to declare something which is permissible as impermissible is also a major sin, like how to declare something which is impermissible as permissible. Then the Chinese emperor asks and he says, أَخْبِرْنِي عَنْ لِبَاسِهِمْ. Tell me about their clothing. So the messenger says, فَأَخْبَرْتُهُ. Then he asked, أَنْ مَطَايَاهُمْ. About their modes of transport. How do they travel? They're conquering these vast, portions of land. How do they move forth? So the messenger says, I said to him, Al-Khayl al-Irab وَوَصَفْتُهَا. He says, I then told him that they have Arab horses. And the messenger says, I described the Arab horses to the Chinese emperor. And the Chinese emperor responded by saying, نِعْمَةِ الْحُصُونُ هَذِهِ. That these are beautiful, the best form of conveyance, the best types of horses. Then the messenger says, وَوَصَفْتُ لَهُ الْإِبِلِ. Then I described to him the camel. وَبُرُوكَهَا وَإِنْبِعَاثَهَا بِحِمْلِهَا. And I described how the camel sits down, because the camel has a double knee. So it's unique how it sits down, how it stands up, and how it's able to carry a load. So the Chinese emperor said, هَذِي صِفَةُ دَوَابِ طِوَالِ الْأَعْنَاقِ. This seems to be the description of an animal with a long neck. After listening to all these responses, Yazdajir, from the messenger of Yazdajir, the Chinese emperor eventually then decided what he's to do. وَكَتَبَ لَهُ إِلَى يَزْدَجِرٍ. He then wrote a response that was to be handed to the messenger, to be taken to Yazdajir. And he said to him, إِنَّهُ لم يمنعني أن أبعث إليك بجيش أوله بمروى وآخره بالسين الجهالة بما يحق علي. He says that, look, I'm not going to support you. I'm not going to send to you an army. However, I am capable of sending to you such an army that if the beginning part of the army is one of the areas of Marwa, which is part of the Iranian border, the end of the army would be in China. So I am capable of sending such an army to you. But I'm not going to send it. Not because I do not know the right that you have upon me in this regard, but the reason why I'm not sending such an army to you is وَلَكِنَّ هَؤُلَاءِ الْقَوْمِ الَّذِينَ وَصَفَ لِي رَسُولَكَ صِفَتَهُمْ لَوْ يُحَاوِلُونَ الْجِبَالَ لَحَدُّوهَا. Because these are such a people that if they had to challenge the mountain, they would destroy the mountain. If they had to challenge the mountain, they would destroy the mountain. وَلَوْ خُلِّيَ لَهُمْ سِرْبُهُمْ أَزَالُونِي مَا دَامُوا عَلَى مَا وَصَفَ. And if their pathway has to be open, they will pass through your kingdom and they will come and reach my kingdom, the Chinese kingdom, and they will remove me from my position as long as they remain on the condition possessing the traits that you've described about them. And then the Chinese emperor advises Yazdajir in the end, and he says, وَرْضَ مِنْهُمْ بِالْمُسَاكَنَةِ. That be happy to just live alongside them. وَلَا تُهِجْهُمْ مَا لَمْ يُهَيِّجُوكَ. And do not attack them as long as they do not attack you. And eventually, the support did not come to Yazdajir. The Muslim army then went into battle, one of the great battles of Islam, which is the Battle of Qadisiyah. And Islam entered the Persian region, that entire region, which is, in the old days was referred to as Khurasan. Yazdajir then fled. He fled with his robe of a king, but he was killed and put to death in a very dishonorable manner. And his jewels and his throne eventually was brought before Sayyidina Uthman radiyallahu ta'ala anhum. And this was when Islam had now entered into this region. And Islam had remained in there until in the recent years where the Shias and the Iranians had taken over, and now they control that area. May Allah bring this area back into the hands of the Muslims. So this was one description of the Sahaba radiyallahu anhum. There are other narrations where the Muslim army was about to face the Romans, and Heracl, who was the Roman emperor, sent an Arab as a spy amongst the Muslims to give him feedback. And he went and then he observed the Sahaba radiallahu anhum. And when he came back, he described them by saying that بِاللَّيْلِ رُهْبَانٌ, that they are such that at night they are like monks, meaning deeply devoted in their worship. وَبِالنَّهَارِ فُرْسَانٌ, and in the day they are vigilant horsemen. وَلَوْ سَرَقَ إِبْنُ مَلِكِهِمْ قَطَعُوا يَدَهُ, and they have such justice amongst them that even if the king's son had to steal, they will cut off his hand. There's no favoritism. وَلَوْ زَنَا رُجِمَ لِإِقَامَةِ الْحَقِّ فِيهِمْ, and if the king's son or the king's daughter had to commit zina, they would mete out the penal punishment, which is to be stoned to death. They would establish it. There's no favoritism. In another narration, it is stated that when the spy had come and he returned to the leader, he asked then, "Ma ta'amuhum?" What do they eat? So the spy then explained, and he said, "Makathtu fihim laylatan," that I stayed with them 24 hours. "La wallahi ma ra'aytu ahadan minhum ya'kulu shay'an." In this period, I didn't see them eat much. "Illa ay yasummu idanan," except that they were sucking on pieces of stick. "Lahum hina yamsuna wa hina yanamuna wa qubayla ay yusbihu." This was in the morning, in the evening, and at the times of their prayer. So what was this? This was the usage of the miswak. That the enemy had seen that the Sahaba radiallahu anhum was using the miswak. And in another narration, where the spy then narrates and he says, "Uhaddithukum ka'annaka tanzuru ilayhim." I will describe you very short, in a short way, as to how they were, as though you're looking at them. Fursanun bin nahar, vigilant horsemen in the day, wa ruhbanun bil layl, and they were devoted worshippers in the night. Ma ya'kuluna fi dhimmatihim illa bi thamanin. They would not consume the wealth of someone who had come there under a treaty, meaning a non-Muslim who had entered the Muslim land, except by paying him the full due of his wealth. Meaning they didn't exploit someone who was weaker than them. Even though it's a Muslim land and they have authority, they could easily take away the wealth from a dhimmi. But they did not do that. They gave him his full due. And this was the sense of justice. وَلَا يَدْخُلُونَ إِلَّا بِسَلَامٍ. Wherever they entered, in a home, in the marketplace, in the, wherever there was gatherings, they entered with the greeting of Islam, with salam. So when we look at all these narrations collectively, we get a beautiful picture of the attributes and the qualities of the Sahaba radiallahu ta'ala anhum. And the purpose for us is that we need to adopt these attributes. And by adopting these attributes, ruhbanun bil layl, to be devoted in our evening worship, having our own evening routine of worship, this is when there will be effect to our da'wah and towards calling others towards the deen of Islam and bringing others closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So may Allah Rabbul Izzah grant us these beautiful qualities and give us the ability to emulate the Sahaba radiyallahu ta'ala anhum.